That's not small investments. We built a £1.5 million pitch out there. We brought an academy director. We've added new staff into different departments in the first team. We've invested money into the first team playing squad.
We're the first time since 2012 that Wycombe has had youth players as part of a formal academy. There are already untapped markets out there, in our opinion, as a club, and we're going to be trying to work in those markets.
I think we're really fortunate in our position where we can grow an official academy from nothing.
We know we can compete because we're going to try and use a slightly different approach to our youth development program. We're not going to have massive squads because as soon as we've started filling our squads with lots and lots of players, guess what? There's less game time, there's less opportunity, there's less contact between our players and our staff.
The difference is here, there's going to be a real clear directive from the owner and myself all the way through the club that young players have to be in our first team.
The opportunity at the moment is golden and probably the most exciting in youth development in the country, in my opinion. We're trying to develop these players for Wycombe Wanderers, but we know at the moment Wycombe Wanderers isn't going to be their destination.
Do you think you'll be able to get talented players who get offers with Fulham, Reading, Chelsea, and will they choose Wycombe over those other clubs?
Why won't we be taking players from North London?
Jeremy, Dan, good to speak with you today. You've said that your intention is for Wycombe to become one of the leading academies in the country. How is that going to happen?
Thanks, Sean. It's thanks for having us. Good to be on the show. I think we're in the process now of really trying to be able to articulate our plans, and our mission statement is to be eventually one of the leading academies in the country and beyond that's developing exceptional footballers, exceptional people, primarily for Wycombe's first team, but we know the business model will also dictate that this isn't necessarily a destination for them, and that they may then be utilised in the wider UK market, the European market, and the global market. So we're really ambitious with it. How is it going to happen? We have got a new ownership group that have come in the last 6 months, and they have a really, really strong desire to ensure that the club's sustainable future is starting to be built from the academy. So we're now in the process of mapping out. We've got a roadmap of how we work towards being one of those leading academies. We'll eventually want to become a Category 1 academy. So in terms of the actual professionalisation of it, Category 1 is a destination that we want to get to. That doesn't mean in the meantime that we're not producing players, or it doesn't mean that when we're Cat 3 or Cat 2 that we won't be producing players, because there are some brilliant academies that are doing that already. So that's one element of how we professionalise, which is going to mean staffing structures. It's going to mean infrastructure. It's going to mean ensuring that when the auditors come into our building, which is a little bit like the Ofsted, that we've got the standards, we've got the processes, we've got the programs. So the moment to get to that place off in the future, the first starting point for us is to align a vision, which we've just discussed, but now we're starting to think about people. And the biggest thing about any high performance culture, environment, and I'm sure you've spoken to millions of people that say the same thing, it's the people, right? We're in the business of people. We're in the business of developing people. It'll be my job as an academy director to try and help develop the people within my direct remit, which is staff. So we're trying to find some good people that will be helping us reach that vision. And eventually it'll be their job then to develop people and players and young people, should I say.
So where are you at right now?
So I'm a month into the job, so it's still new, and we're still, at the moment here at Harlington, which is the whole club's been in for only a matter of months. There's lots of work going on around us as we speak. The club's done an unbelievable job of making it ready for the first team who are here, training on it, and we're already doing lots of work around the infrastructure ready for the academy to professionalise. So we've got applications and designs and thoughts for an indoor dome on site. We're starting to explore that sort of stuff. We're meeting lots of different people in terms of workforce and starting to have conversations with them about the suitability for that. We've got our first set of players coming in during the October half term, which is only a few weeks away. We're the first time since 2012 that Wycombe has had youth players as part of a formal academy. in their doors, and then we'll obviously be looking at those boys and trying to give them the platform to showcase their talent, and then hopefully from the back of there we start building a group of players that helps us work towards what will be Category 4 next year. Okay. So that's the starting point, July 1st 2025, Category 4, under 18s and under 21s. That's where we're going to start building our base from, and really, really important for us as a club that we're not starting necessarily with an under 9s to under 16s, which is going to mean, onboarding an incredible amount of people in a short space of time, which is tricky, right? So under 18s and 21s, which is, let's say, around 30 players potentially, and potentially around 20 staff. And that'll be the core staff, that'll be the leadership group, that'll be senior staff that will be, part of this wider vision and journey that's hopefully going to be a legacy piece for everybody involved. And I suppose the only other thing to say, Sean, is from my point of view, really important, and that is, acknowledging from me really, is that, we've already got a pathway here. So Sam Grace is our development coach. He's been here for a few years now. He's been developing players from the non-league already that are in our first team currently or out on loan, being prepared for first team readiness. And, that's contributing already to our first team. So in terms of academy, we're building it, it's going to be formalised, but actually in terms of pathway and opportunities, this club's already doing that. And it did it brilliantly way back when with Richard Dobson in 2012, and when it closed down then, that was a major shift for the club, but that was recognised back then as pound for pound one of the best smaller Cat 3 type academies.
So the players that are coming in October, what age group are those players going to be?
So they're predominantly going to be year 11 students, essentially, so under 16s. Yeah. So that's where our starting point. We're trying to build an under 18s group for next season. We've already got some development players in the building already, which we'll be adding to, but the more significant player recruitment will be around that under 18s age group for next season. So under 16s, a lot of these boys will be coming from sort of grassroots coaching companies, unattached obviously to professional clubs. That's, we've already got some history of doing that well, and we want to continue to do that well. And then alongside that, we'll be blending in, the boys that are being unfortunately told that they're not getting scholarships at their current clubs now, around the London and areas and surrounding areas.
That's really, really exciting. There's so many academies already in London. Why do you guys think that there's going to be players that the other clubs have left on the table?
Do you want me to say this one? Yeah. I think there's two bits to this, Sean. I think already we've talked about a little bit, there are already untapped markets out there, in our opinion, as a club, and we're going to be trying to work in those markets. So from a under 18s point of view, 18s and below, there's loads and loads of talent in grassroots. The grassroots area in this region is as strong as it is anywhere in the country, and there are players in there that don't have the access because there's not the opportunities yet to be accommodated in professional environments, other academies. We're opening, over the next 2 years, we're opening up around 120 to 140 places for young people. So we know that the teams that are striving and competing well at grassroots clubs, those players just need the opportunity, and we're able to give that to them. The other part of that is that the players that are in and around our first team have come from non-league, so we'll be in that market as well, very much so, because what we found is, and it's been a good learning curve for me, a lot of those boys have been in academies maybe in their formative years. They've got a good technical base. They've got an understanding of what professionalism looks like. Maybe they've dropped out for whatever reason along the pathway. They've gone and played men's football in non-league, so at 16, 17, 18, and that's helped prepare them physically, in terms of the dressing room environment, in terms of the social stuff, to be ready to step quicker potentially into a first team environment here at Wycombe Wanderers, and that's what's happened. And they come sometimes with a bit more of a hunger because they've not been given everything potentially. They're coming with a motivation to prove people wrong from previous worlds and lives and experiences they've had. And I think that's something we'll go after. And then Dan, you probably add the second part of that.
And I think we want to be really different. So traditionally, academies are set up in a certain way, and I think we're really fortunate in our position where we can grow an official academy from nothing, with all due respect, obviously. And Jeremy's touched on the development squad that's here in operation right now, but we are fortunate to build and structure and design something from nothing, and to do that is unheard of. And I think the opportunity it presents to us is to be different, to challenge the norms that are out there, and not necessarily, and of course we adhere to the regulations and rules within EPPP, and we obviously will follow that and be formalising that. But actually, we can be creative. We can challenge each other, and we can challenge what is out there, and we can bring in certain things around, cognition of players, and be a bit more informative and innovative in those spaces. And that's just one of the topics we've spoken about, how we can be more progressive. We recognise that if we go pound for pound with the clubs that are in this region, we may come unstuck in terms of let's say our profile right now. But actually, what Jeremy's touched on there around our USP, to get players in our first team quickly and present opportunities to them, and for parents that see us as a real pathway opportunity for their son to get through into a realistic opportunity. We know it's not always going to be it's not always going to happen at the end of the line where a player does get in our first team, but we've got to create that opportunity for players to have the next step. And I think that's where our experiences of working in clubs in this region, but also outside this region, play dividends to that.
I'm interested, and I'm sure a lot of our audience would also be interested to know the costs of running an academy. I've heard, and we've said it on the show before, that we think that a Man City academy might cost between 20 and 30 million a year. Same with like Chelsea, some of those like top academies, it's a lot. And we broke it down where we guessed that if there was 300 players and 20 million a year on an academy, that you're averaging something like £55,000 per player per year as an average. So, yeah, what are you predicting? What do you think the next few years are going to cost the club?
I mean, there's going to be significant investment into the academy. To get to Category 1, I think the minimum expenditure as per sort of the youth development rules is, in and around £5 million, £4 to £5 million. That's probably the lower end of the Cat 1 scale.
And that's per year?
Per season. So I think what's important to acknowledge here is that, we know who we are as a club. We're, evolving and things are moving, and we're following our ambition. We don't necessarily want to compete with those numbers that you've just said there about one of the biggest clubs in the world. But what we can be, and Dan's mentioned it as already, pound for pound, who we are and what our strengths are, we know we can compete because we're going to try and use a slightly different approach to our youth development program. That doesn't mean we won't be spending the money. We're going to have to spend the money. We're going to, if we're a Cat 1 academy, we're going to have in and around, 40 to 50 full-time staff. Some of the Cat 1 academies, by the way, have way more than that, full-time staffs. I think our challenge is, if we are going to be agile, streamlined, have a really close relationship with our players, with our parents, then I'm not sure having that number of people is necessary. I think it's more about having the right people, quality people that can really drive certain areas of their expertise within the environment, but maintain and retain like that individualisation. And that's a word that we're talking a lot about at the moment. That's one area where we think we can stand out. And I'm careful with the word different sometimes, because I think there's probably other environments out there that are doing this sort of stuff, but we know that it's still innovation, what we're going after. And we want to stand out from like you said, a crowded marketplace. And individualisation is, firstly, by its very nature, challenging in a team environment, because we're putting 11 players onto a pitch, but we're talking about individuals making it through the other end of the pathway and the funnel. But secondly, it's, how do you ensure, and it's hard, but along that pathway from, 8 or 9 years old through to 18 or 19 years old towards our first team in the senior ranks, how do you try and make a bespoke and individualised programme around your players to give them the best chance to fulfil their potential? That's something I think that academies not necessarily struggle with, but it's a constant daily challenge, and some potentially become quite team orientated. And I think that's where we want to try and make sure we're really looking at the individual, the person, the individual. So that'll mean, in terms of like methods and tactics, we're not going to have massive squads. We're not going to do that, because as soon as we've started filling our squads with lots and lots of players, guess what? There's less game time, there's less opportunity, there's less contact between our players and our staff, right? So the ratios between our staff and our players are going to be hugely important over the next few years to make sure that not just potentially our highest potential player, but every player in that group gets what they need to try and fulfill their potential. That's what we're going after. And it's a feeling, right? Like culture is a feeling. That's what we're talking about here, is that the parents that eventually walk through our doors in a year's time and are part of our academy formally, there's a feeling there that they're part of something and they're understood. They're accepted into the environment. They're able to flourish and grow. They're inspired by the environment. Those are the sort of things that we need to make sure our environment is. And like Dan said, we are doing this from scratch, right? Yeah. So we're not unpicking something. We're not renovating a new house. We're building a new house. And so the opportunity at the moment is golden and probably the most exciting in youth development in the country, in my opinion, because rather than jumping down rabbit holes and going, right, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do that, we're taking the time to stand back. And we won't have all the answers for that yet because it's going to evolve, it's going to grow, but we're taking the time to stand back and go, okay, where can we be different? Because as soon as we start committing to things, we're going to start, it's going to be harder to unpick those things and work backwards if it wasn't the right direction. So we're really at the moment focusing and tuning in on like what that vision is. What are the rabbit holes? Where are we going to be brilliant? Where are we going to stand out in 5 years' time? Where are players and parents going to go, wow, that environment is this. Yeah. It's identifiable,
Yeah. And I suppose, from my experience with Chelsea, I've seen that over the years. I was actually here at Harlington when this was like the academy that Chelsea had, and I saw us go from here over to Cobham, and then I saw how Cobham built out, and obviously Abramovich put so much money in, and they had that resource, but then it was then the people that then drove it. And things do take time. They had to buy the ground off the college, and then they had to build clubhouses and expand, and there was often people, like loads of people, it's still like that now, loads of people in offices, and they're just always forever growing. But I also saw it with QPR. So I had a period of time working there, and I went there in 2008 just as they got new ownership, and they, again, it's funny, but they came to Harlington here, and the dream was that there would be all this investment coming, and QPR were going to have an academy like Chelsea. I think that was like a lot of what was being talked about. You guys saying that it's going to be a leading academy, I mean, with that statement, but not necessarily putting in the same type of numbers as a Man City, Arsenal, Chelsea. I really would like to just like drill in to understand the differences, because I appreciate what you've said. You're going to have a focus on the individual, and you're also going to have smaller groups. But are there any other things that are going to make this a special academy?
I think certainly from our side, from an owner's point of view and the executive side, the board side, the academy for us is going to be a real key core part of what we do in the first team space as well. So you touched on a number of clubs there that have expectations in the Premier League, they have expectations in the Champions League, they have expectations for fan base. We have that, but we don't have the anticipation right now that we're in that Champions League space, right? So we have time, and I think from our side, what we can build away from those types of clubs is the fact that we do have that time. Tomorrow, if Arsenal, Chelsea pick up one of their top players from their academy, where do they go? Can they play minutes in their first team? We've seen it in the last few days. Opportunities for young players to play, and they don't get their opportunity. The difference is here, we'd like to feel that there's going to be a real clear directive from the owner and myself all the way through the club that young players have to be in our first team. And I don't think you get that. And go back to your examples you've shared. The money, the investment that is needed at the top level to sustain Champions League, sustain Premier League status, sustain Championship status has to be fed to the first team, has to be bled into the first team and everything they're doing. That's not the same here. We have time. We 100% support what the first team capacity is and where we want to take that. And we want to take that to the Premier League, of course. But we want to do it in a way that it's built around young players getting into the first team. At the same time, obviously making sure that we professionalise every single space here at the club. So albeit, as Jeremy's touched on, like it's going to be a challenge. We're not sitting here saying this is going to be really easy. I think just probably where the difference is between a QPR and us right now is the fact that we have the personnel and people at the top level that vested into the academy space. I think that's completely different to a lot of other clubs out there.
Can you expand on that a little bit further?
Yeah, I think when and I've been fortunate enough to obviously sit with Mikel and Edward around kind of what the process was to lead into finding the club that was going to be right for the project.
So they're the owners.
Yeah, Mikel and Edward and myself are effectively on the board. Effectively, so when we're looking at the options that are out there, finding a club that has, Jeremy's touched on, a blank canvas in the academy space was a real KPI for us. So we went after that, and we found what we perceive as being a real good opportunity to build something from scratch. Jeremy's touched on it. If you go and buy another club right now that has an established academy, you have to unpick certain things. You're having to move on people, unfortunately. You're having to change things. So for us, the KPI was to find something that was sustainable longer term by finding something that was a blank canvas.
I'm just going to interrupt the podcast for 30 seconds to tell you about We Make Footballers. We Make Footballers are the largest football coaching provider to children aged 4 to 12 in the UK, operating across 200 facilities. We focus on developing the individual, working on the technical and physical components of the game, and it's had amazing results, with hundreds of our ex-players joining professional academies and 4 of our ex-players currently playing in the Premier League. Our program is built around small-sided play using indoor and outdoor facilities. Visit our website, wemakefootballers.com, to see if we have a training facility in your area. Yeah, was there other appeals of Wycombe other than not having an academy? Yeah, what were some of the other appeals of buying this club?
Yeah, I think from our side, and I speak on behalf of all of us, I think the natural family orientated feeling you get from everyone, internal and external, at the football club. Wycombe's renowned for being a club that has high values and has a great culture, right? So that aligns completely with us. And there was let's say there's been other opportunities out there that may not necessarily brought that, and probably would have had to have changed a lot from the very beginning and onset. That's not the case here. We've inherited, we've been fortunate to inherit great people, great culture, great values, all the things that sit really tight to where we want to be. So we haven't had to come in and change everything. And that's really, in my opinion, as I said, there's other examples out there right now that new ownership groups are going through that it's probably not the case. So from our side, that's been a really easy transition. And I think also like-minded people in the building. So we've been fortunate with the manager, we've been fortunate with the players, the first team players. Everyone is buying into the vision and the strategy going forward. So I think you can't do that without everyone buying into it. And the academy, obviously, for us as the ownership group, that is absolutely like one of the key core pillars of the football club for the long-term success. Do
you think, and working as a scout for a long time, I know how competitive it is. I remember when you were a scout with Fulham and we were competing for players when I would be at Chelsea, and we would be trying to battle for the same players. Obviously, that goes on so much in London. Do you think that you'll be able to get young players eventually when you start having under 7s and under 8s? And we know how tough that is, vying for signatures for the under 9s. Do you think you'll be able to get talented players who get offers with Fulham, Reading, Chelsea, and will they choose Wycombe over those other clubs?
Yeah, I mean, I guess most clubs will be trying to say the same thing, right? But I think rewind for a second. We're in West London, and we're talking about a massive population, right? So if we were just to take West London for it in itself, QPR, Brentford, and now us directly in that area. I know players might be moving between other clubs in other parts of London, but pre-academy, let's say 15 places as a new under 9, right? So that means there's 45 places potentially between ourselves, QPR and Brentford, those 3 clubs in the mini. I know there is enough talent out there for us to be able to bring talented players through.
But sorry to interrupt, but in the hour distance, it's not just those ones. Obviously, AFC Wimbledon, QPR, Reading, Brentford are just opening up their academy. There's Chelsea. I mean, some players might be close enough that they can still get to Brighton, maybe even Crystal Palace. There's so much competition. But you guys will still back yourselves to...
Of course, yeah. But I even think, like, you know, why wouldn't we be taking players from North London, which is in the backyard of someone else's, you know, and other clubs, or South London, nearer to AFC Wimbledon or Crystal Palace? Like, we've got the access for that where we are right now. So we're talking about a population centre of, you know, London, but Greater London and the surrounding counties as well. So I suppose my point is that I know there's enough talent out there that we'll be able to get very good players in with high potential and then start developing them. If we're talking about the youngest age groups, I think the bit for us is, and we've talked about it, like, we have to accept in the first few years that if we aren't quite where we want to be yet, because we're progressive and we're still putting the foundations and we're still embedding, if we lose a couple along the way through what you've talked about there, the Brentford stuff, and we can accept that, like, because we're patient. I don't think I'm not expecting a knock on the door saying, how have we lost that under 12 to so-and-so? Because we're in year 1, 2 or 3 of the project, we're looking way beyond that in terms of where we want to be with it. So I think that, you know, that is it. And then where we want to be with it is that, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is that when parents and players walk through here, the individualisation, the customer service, for want of a really horrible term to talk about young people and parents, is so good and so strong that they actually feel like they belong here and they want to contribute to it, and they have that sense of belonging. And that's where, I'm not saying all academies, some academies definitely do it really, really well, and academies are getting better at it. But it is really, really challenging for some academies to be able to provide that level of feeling and customer service, again, for want of a better term, because, you know, you become a number in a big system, right? And I think that's where we've got to try and really, really be specialists. We've got to try and make sure that we're giving that level of thought and feeling towards each individual that comes through our door.
I remember, and yeah, I touched on it, saying this period of time that I was looking after the pre-academy at QPR, and we didn't have resources, even though I thought that the new owners were going to pump loads of money, and it didn't happen. So then I was then trying to recreate the experiences, and I thought it was like a football utopia over at Chelsea at that time, and from what I learned. And so I was trying to then copy that at QPR. And I remember, I feel like the training sessions were really high quality. I only kept maybe like 6 players in my under-8 group, and I kept it really, really tight. And it produced like good players. I think back during that period, and I've said it a few times on the podcast with some of the players, but it was like Harvey Elliott came through there. Alfie Gilchrist is one. There's another boy called Janeel Bennett who got bought by Tottenham. It was just in a really short period of time, I was able to attract talent, where Harvey's dad, he had loads of offers at all the clubs, but he enjoyed that under-8s training where it was these 6 kids. It was really, really intense. He really believed in that future, in that direction. It was going to be good for Harvey. So I think at that time, I definitely would feel that I was, a strong coach. And I know the coaches like around us at QPR were creating a very strong environment, which then meant we were able to punch above our weight. Do you think that you're going to be able to attract some top coaches to come and work for Wycombe? Do you have are they going to be able to? Are you going to be able to take coaches from Chelsea or from other clubs? I mean,
I'm not going to put any names in there, but in terms of clubs and stuff like that, we know that this is a serious project. We may have a few people going, being a bit sceptical about it. But I think in time, quite soon, people will start to see that we've got a lot of credibility. And that's going to be also because we're attracting some really, really high caliber people to this project. And I think it snowballs. Once you've got a few and you start getting a bit of success and people realize it's a slightly different environment and we'll be individualizing their development as well, I think then it snowballs and we attract more talent. I think one of the things like Dan and I are talking about at the moment, because it is a blank canvas, is, we've got to be in a marketplace where not necessarily all those clubs that you've just mentioned there, but historically sometimes coaches and hard-working development staff aren't rewarded as well as they should be. Now, we're not going to be working outside of our own remit and not be sustainable, but we will pay people properly. We'll pay them fairly. We'll be will be transparent to them. So, I mean, listen, I'm not going to put numbers in there, but, one of the things that really impressed me when I was sitting down in an interview with Mikel and with Dan and co was the owner couldn't understand why, let's say, an under 9s and 10s lead phase coach was paid less, maybe significantly less than a lead PDP coach. Couldn't understand it. Why is that the case? And from his point of view, from a business point of view, surely we want the best under 9s and 10s coaches who are specialists in that areas. What's the difference? So that's stuff we're talking about, that actually we need parity, we need fairness, we need specialists that are brilliant in those areas, and we will attract those people. But then the next bit then is we've got to develop them, right? Like retention then becomes the next part. So let's get them in the door. Let's retain them, and then development of those staff is going to be huge. So again, going back to the individualisation piece, it'll be my job and others in the leadership roles to truly make sure that those people are getting development and learning. And it is hard in academies, don't get me wrong, and lots of people use the phrase, like you've heard it before, it's a hamster wheel, right? You're just going, we've got to find innovative ways to try and help people step off that hamster wheel from time to time, go and see different environments, which we'll support them with, we'll resource some of that stuff so that they come back inspired, they come back with new ideas that might support us, they share those new ideas with the wider staff team, innovative conversations and creative conversations start happening, and they feel that the club's investing in their development. And then from the development point of view, then you start talking about progress. So I was at Wimbledon for a good 10, 12 years, and I think staff retention was something we talked about a lot. And one of the things that we had there was not a blank piece of paper. We built it from a little bit more than we are here, but the staff went on a journey with the academy and the growth of it. So I can think of a guy called Rob Tuvey, who was the under 9s assistant coach, but he was working the community scheme, and that was 2011 or 12, let's say. Well, he's just finished working 3 years in the first team at AFC Wimbledon, right? So that was his journey with that club, and there's loads of other examples. Michael Hamilton's still there now, and he went all the way from working with foundation players to now academy manager. So we've got to be really good at trying to help their pathway as well and trying to support their progress. Those are the sort of things I think help keep good people in the building. And the last bit that I'll add to that, and I'm going on a little bit here, Sean, but like we're talking about, and again, it's the vision, right? So it's maybe idealistic for us to be talking about it, but how do we create a training environment, a workspace, a working environment for all those developers, not just coaches, because there's brilliant developers as physios, sports scientists, psychologists, where it is truly interdisciplinary. And that means that we don't have doors with passes that don't get them through to certain areas of the building, and they can't access the first team or have a conversation with the first team staff, or sports science staff in one section of the building and they've got to walk a few minutes down the corridor and then down some stairs to go and have a conversation with the under 18 staff. We want to try and create a space eventually that is truly interdisciplinary, and that will mean the first team staff eventually are based in the same workspace as the under 9s coach over there, or the under 9s development staff, and they're having a conversation at the water cooler, getting a cup of coffee on Monday morning, talking about their games and having that level of interaction. I think is part of innovation. It's part of being creative. It's part of being one club. It helps keep people in the building, and it's not just the under 9s coaches then going to go and be interested in the first team or the under 20, 21s or under 18s. It's vice versa. The culture's got to be that the under 18s and 21 staff are interested in what the under 9s are doing. It works both ways, right? So that's the sort of stuff that we're aspiring towards and the stuff that we're talking about that's in our future.
I love that, and just as you're talking about that, I'm realizing the vastness of the project, because I'm thinking about an example that I remember Neil Bath said to us that was happening with the first team building, where they stopped integrating for a period of time. I don't know if they've changed it now, but they stopped the 16s being in the same space as the first team because they felt that psychologically it was making the 16-year-olds start thinking they'd made it. And they had to earn the right to start getting with the first team. And so then they created more separation with that. And it became a big thing finally when you got to play pool with the first teamers. But there's something they had to learn that as they went along. But you've almost got, with what you're describing, you've got the architecture of the building in how that then is being created. But then your methodologies and the culture that you want needs to be thought of at the same time. So there's so much that you've got to design, I mean, Dan, how are you coping with everything that you've got to work on at the moment?
I don't think we've got long enough for that one. Yeah, listen, there's priorities, there's things that we can influence right now, but I think one of the things that we've done quite early on in this, acquisition of the club is we brought in key people. So fortunate enough, obviously Jeremy, has joined us, right, and has had that experience of building an academy, from nothing really with AFC Wimbledon. And obviously I know he had a lot of support staff around him, but now then obviously taking steps into the Category 1 environment and then working for the Premier League. So go back to, what he's touched on there around staff, exactly what we're doing. We're bringing in high executive level people and leadership staff to come and be the stakeholders for their pillars. And, go back to your question, there's no way I could do it by myself. And, categorically, everything we do daily, weekly, throughout the last 5 months we've been here, Mikel and Edouard have been across everything. So there's a vested interest from us three as the owners to make sure that whilst it's not micromanaging, it's making sure that we are supporting the likes of Jeremy and the stakeholders that are coming in to lead their spaces, that they're getting everything they need. And, I think you can speak to any members of staff that have worked here, from the manager through to our medical lead, to our S&C in the first team space, to nutrition, to anything that we've done here. You can see with the movement of the training ground over to Harlington, everything we've done is with a tangible outcome at the end of it. So yes, there's things that we have to say no to, but frankly, everything that's been put forward at the moment is considered. If it's justified, that it makes what I call the boat going faster. And I say this to these guys all the time. If you come forward with something that you feel makes the boat go faster, i.e. the team, our structure, our pathway, then absolutely we'll consider it. And we've got a brand new Deso pitch that's been installed that will be ready to run in the next few weeks. Jeremy's talked about the dome application. That's not small investments. So I think the appetite and the investment, but also the interest from us and is paramount to make sure that we're across it, but also trust in people like Jeremy and the stakeholders I've just mentioned to drive the club forward.
I need to interrupt the podcast one more time. Did you know that We Make Footballers is a franchise business? We began franchising in 2015 and we now have over 60 franchises in operation across the UK, Dubai and US, serving over 10,000 players. If you're a talented coach but don't want to start your own coaching business alone, visit franchisewmf.com to find out how We Make Footballers can help you operate a successful football coaching company. What time frame was it that the new ownership team bought the club, and what they've achieved now?
Yeah, so we took the keys on the 3rd of May this year.
Oh my God. Okay.
So, fast forward five months, get my maths right there. So fast forward to 5 months, we've moved training ground. We built a £1.5 million pitch out there. We brought an academy director. We're soon to be adding academy staff. We've added new staff into different departments in the first team.
You've retrofitted the whole training ground here, the office spaces.
Office space. We've invested money into the office space. We're about to get a refurb in the gym. We've invested money into the first team playing squad. So there's been a lot that's happened over the last few months, and I think when we look back, there's certainly been some challenges, but at the same time, there's the huge. We look around now and we go, it was all worth it. Yeah. We have, and credit to everyone in the football club right now. The patience that everyone has shared, from the manager all the way through to the first team players, has been exceptional. Yeah. We've had building works go on with meetings in the background, but we were fortunate enough to sit with someone yesterday to talk about these are your stories to tell in the years to come. Yeah.
It's so exciting. And so getting the keys on 5th of May and achieving all of that, there must have been so much planning before that allowed you to be able to do so much in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, you think so, right? I think, obviously Mikel, Edouard are meticulous in everything they do. So, I was fortunate enough to join them only recently in March, April time. So, but even from that period onwards, it was a very strategic planning and mapping out of everything we want to do with the football club. So if you think about, the movement of the training ground, Jeremy's touched on it. it's a strategic move. It's not just because this was the site that was available. It's on the Elizabeth line. When we cross-referenced, right, where are we going to get our pool of players from? London. It's a big hotbed for us, but also Reading. So Reading on the Elizabeth line can get here as well. The access on the roads, the transport links is paramount to what we want to do from the long term. And obviously we want to make and professionalise everything we do within the football club. So bringing them to the first team here to a site that is operational and functional, and gives them the best opportunity to go and perform Saturday, Tuesday. And I know this is more about the academy, but I want to make sure that when the academy players come into our doors, they see this as well, and they see that it's not a separate building. It's not turn right into a car park, and we wanted to methodically put it all on the same site. To make sure that there was that that mindset. But I think there's been a lot of learnings, but there's also been a lot of trust in people that are already here to lead and drive, and then we bring new people to the club to drive the new direction, the new way of working that we want to go after and bring everyone with us. And we got to keep that approach.
I mean, we touched on that Jeremy had 12 years experience at AFC Wimbledon, and I'm keen to hear more about your background, Jeremy. But Dan, I've known you from when you were working at Fulham, and since then you've been at Arsenal, Everton, head of emerging talent. What experiences from other clubs will you bring to Wycombe?
Yeah, and Southampton as well.
Of course,
just to add, sorry,
yeah.
Can't miss them out. Lots of good and lots of indifferent, and probably an answer to or jumping on one of Jeremy's points earlier. I think we're fortunate. We're leading this space, but actually we've had lots of experience where we've seen lots of good and lots of indifferent, as I touched on. So we're able to bring those experiences across. And for me personally, primarily my roles have been in recruitment, right? So, but I've also seen how multidisciplinary teams work and how they function, and I've seen a whole cycle of players in lots of different clubs. So, and the directive of each of those clubs has been different at the times I've been in those clubs. So Fulham, with a great era of young players getting through and getting through to success and competing with the likes of yourself around the corner. And one of the things you talked about there is like, how can we be competitive in London as a Wycombe? Why not? I've been through it. We've challenged the norms. I talked about it earlier. We challenged the norms that are out there right now. Why won't players come here? And so we've got to create that narrative that players need to be here. Same like we were fortunate to do it at Fulham. Arsenal was a different time. Lots of change. Arsene Wenger to Unai Emery, and lots of change in that building. And obviously Southampton have probably, again, fortunate to work around real innovative people and people that have challenged norms, but also done things very differently. And probably that's where kind of the like-mindedness of how we operate and how my relationship with Mikel is, that we look at those sorts of things as well. From my side, it's exciting to bring it all in, good and bad.
And Jeremy, off air, we were talking about your background, and I remember when we'd met before and you'd done such an amazing job with AFC Wimbledon, and that was a time where, there was limited resources and what you built up there with that academy. And then since then, you've had, a role with the Premier League, and you've been in the girls' game with Brighton and with West Ham. Could you talk about maybe your experiences and how that's going to help shape this role and what's going to happen now with the academy here at Wycombe?
Yeah, sure. I think, like anybody, and Dan's talked about it there, like the collection of experiences that I've had so far, some really, really good stuff, some indifferent stuff as well along the way, and that's across the board. The experience at Wimbledon is probably the one that obviously is, been a bigger part of my life, and that I still hold really dear to. We did that with some really, really talented people. It was very organic, it just evolved. I was a very young sort of academy leader in that space at that time, not really too intentional with what we were trying to do. We were just trying to do it day by day. And like you said, we did it without resource. We just did it on culture and an incredible story that the club had. And we hang our hat on that. And exactly how Dan said it there with Fulham, we felt the same as well. We felt we kept players away from bigger clubs based on our culture and our story and our sense of belonging that people had within the building, staff and players. And that's something that, is going to be the same in any high performance environment. So that definitely transfers to what we're going to try and develop and build here. People have asked me, oh yeah, well you built that at Wimbledon and now you're going to build it. But they're very, very different projects, very different set of context. There are definitely learnings that I'll take from it, but because this is going to be much more intentional, much more strategic, there's definitely more ambition behind where we want to get to with it as well. I'm probably then starting to lean on, even when I'm looking a bit further ahead, on where I've seen how the Premier League works as an organisation and being able to be privileged enough to go into different academies as part of the Premier League to see how those places are working. At West Ham, an incredible academy with incredible history of developing young players, but a really unique culture as well, like a really East London unique culture that they're really proud of. So that was a combination really of both, between culture and then the resource and the badge and the power of the badge. So we'll be leaning on all that stuff, and Brighton, gets lots of plaudits obviously for the incredible stuff that the first team are doing and their recruitment model. And what struck me when I walked in there for the first time is that there's just a hell of a lot of young people walking around inspired and happy and fulfilling their potential. So again, like talking about all the different environments, the facilities and the resources, but actually the word that we'll always come back to is probably culture. And that's where we're at the moment. We're talking very deliberately around how we then, especially in the academy, build a culture. And of course it takes time. And something we learned yesterday, or was talked about yesterday with an expert in that field, is like culture happens anyway. So we can say the word culture and we're going to develop a culture, but it's what type of culture. So it's, us talking around the stuff we've already talked about a little bit, but that won't change, right? Like once we've got that in place, that will be the core that drives the high performance for the next, for hopefully the next 10, 20 years, right, at this club. It's the stuff around that will evolve and change, and that will be innovative. We'll add data, and there'll be some new stuff that comes on the scene, and we'll adapt here, we'll adapt there. But in terms of what we're building at the moment, it's like we're talking about values, we're talking about vision, behaviours. That's all the stuff that then comes into culture. And if we get that right from the onset, it projects us, it propels us on a bit of a journey, right? And Dan alluded to that earlier. Like if we don't take the time now to try and be deliberate about that and understand what that needs to look like, and we just dive down those rabbit holes, it's really hard to backtrack out of there. So this is the golden opportunity at the moment, and the club are incredibly supportive with my work that I'm doing deliberately in the academy to support me with that, to allow me to have the space and the resources and the people around me to start building that culture and developing it. So I've probably talked around that a little bit, but I think all the experiences I've had, Sean, like they all come back to the fact that culture is going to be number one here, but knowing what good looks like, knowing what necessarily some academies fall into traps with is stuff that we want to avoid. We don't want to just be any other academy, and that's not being disrespectful to academies, but we've got to really make sure that this is unique, it's different, and it's it's a place where people feel that as soon as they walk through the door.
A phrase that's often shared in my own company and also with Chelsea, people talk about culture as being your behaviours when no one's watching. And I've definitely experienced that with Chelsea. Chelsea do have an incredible culture. Neil Bath, he did an incredible job curating that, getting everyone to buy into it, and little things that we talk about where you'd be walking past, there's so many staff at Cobham, so you don't know people, but everyone will nod ahead, say hi, good morning, good evening, whatever it might be. Everyone's so friendly. You pick up litter if it goes on the pitch. There's just behaviours that you have, the work that you do when you don't have to work, but are you going to, as a scout, are you going to be committed to keep going out, keep in touch with your parents, keep doing all the right things, and supporting all your other team members, connecting with everyone? That is just, that is what I see as an ideal culture, and it has been why Chelsea have produced so many players. And I've with my own soccer school, I've looked so closely at that, and I've tried to bring that into the behaviours with our company. But yeah, I can understand why you're talking about that so much, Jeremy, because at this stage of building an academy from scratch, that is what you have to perfect, because eventually there's going to be so many staff and you're not going to be able to micromanage them all. They've all just got to go off what are the values of Wycombe and what's the culture, how do people want to behave.
I think on that as well, Sean, I'd like to add is like, the club has already got a great culture already. So the academy, we're obviously thinking about how we do this, but there's already, like, I've never been at a club before where I've got to know the first team players so quickly and so well. I'm not saying I'm best mates with them yet. I'm only a month in, but genuinely people coming up to you and doing exactly what you've just described there, like shaking your hand, being curious and inquisitive about what my work is going to look like. And that's already here at this club. So we've got to we've got to bottle that up, right, and maintain that stuff through. And then, like you'll remember from Chelsea and still to this day, like the people that have been there for as long as they've been there because of that culture, that's what we're aiming for. So at the moment, from my point of view, trying to meet different people that will be in leadership spaces in the academy that will be gatekeepers for that, because you've hit the nail on the head. Like, I'm going to be a gatekeeper, but I'm not going to be the only gatekeeper. We're really going to need to make sure we've got people in leadership that can do that. So the profile of person that we're talking to at the moment is like, they've got great experience in the industry already. They know what good looks like. They'll help us accelerate through some of the stuff that we're doing because they've got that experience already. But they're at a time in their career at the moment where they've seen good, they've seen indifferent, they maybe not been able to have the autonomy to really grow. So they're a little bit younger potentially, but they're high potential people that will help us. So I think of it like the 75% of stuff that we're going to be doing in the academy that is going to be not necessarily different from what other clubs do. It's going to be some of the same stuff with a different badge on and applied to our context. The other 25% is where those staff are going to have, a curious mindset, a growth mindset, be open to being challenged and their thinking being challenged, and help us co-create that stuff. Because there's no point in us bringing people in that have got so much experience that they're fixed on how to think and how to do things. They need to be open to new ideas, and there's no point in bringing people in that haven't got the humility, I suppose, to be open to, go on then, tell me about that. Why did that work for you? And that's where we've got to be to try and start co-creating, the programs, the individual programs, the game model, the curriculum, the games program, all the different things that are going to matter together.
So I really liked that there you started to talk about the curriculum and the program, and that was one of the things that I wanted to ask you guys. In all the things that you're designing, you've talked about July 2025, you're going to have an under-18s group and an under-21s group. So the methodology of Wycombe Football Club with the type of players that you want to produce and the type of football that you want to play, will that be directed at the under-18s and under-21s that you're going to start with, or will you design something for 20 years' time? What's the plan there with the program and the philosophy of football?
Yeah, I'll start this one, and I'm sure Jeremy might add to this. Obviously there's a bigger, wider discussion going on around that right now. I think ultimately we have to embed what the first team manager's doing and how that looks, because ultimately we are very close in proximity to the first team, right? So we have to make sure that our players are ready. Ready is a wide word in terms of making sure what is ready. We're fortunate we've got, like we touched on earlier, Sam Grace and personnel to be able to support them to that transition across. And obviously if it's not immediate, it might be out on loan and then come back in. And obviously that's been a successful space for us, right? So, however, obviously the design of the playing style methodology, game models, all the things that we talk about, right? So that'll be down to, again, stakeholders. So, we are, heading in the direction of bringing in people and let's say gatekeepers to that. So, for example, there'll be a head of coaching development, and there'll be an 18s coach, a 21s coach that'll be brought in. But ultimately, there'll have to be a thinking tank opportunity for them all to sit in a room and to design what that needs to look like. And I think they're part of the short, medium and long term game models, but there'll be the caveat that they've got to then think about, okay, how does this then get interpreted to the pitch? How does it get interpreted to senior, wider staff, to us in the executive level, and also to the manager, and how that links into the playing style that he has? But eventually we then have a top to bottom, bottom to top approach of how our game model looks. I'm sure there's things that you can add to that as well.
Well, it's early, right? We're in essentially day one of a new project, so it's very early on. I guess if you come back in a year or two's time, we might have a different answer for you. I think the thing that when Dan's talking there that makes me think is like the stuff we're talking about is we're going to need to be quite principle led. We're not going to be prescriptive. We're not going to have a manual of 400 pages that we give to staff to say this is the game model, off you go. We're going to co-create that, but it's going to be very principle led. So we need to establish and be clear on what a Wycombe team looks like and create that from top to the bottom. But we don't necessarily want to be in a position where we're going, well, it's a 4-3-3 and the right back must behave like this when the goalkeeper's got the ball. The winger must run. We don't want that level of detail. And one of the main reasons for that is because it takes away individualisation, and we're talking about individualisation as a key pillar. So we've got to find a way of working in the academy, a game model that allows flexibility for individuals to grow, allows coaches to flex the game model and the curriculum to the individual's needs, because block 2 of a season, week 3, training session 4 of the week, it's a Wednesday. We can't be saying to that person, well, you have to deliver this. It has to be a rondo followed by a playing out from the back session, because that's the topics that we're on now. That's not going to suit the individuals. That's a one-size-fits-all approach. So we have to work out a curriculum, a development program that suits the individuals. I'd much prefer us to have clear principles, well communicated, that everyone understands this is what a Wycombe team looks like, but give autonomy to the developers, because we're going to bring in some good developers to flex that to the individual's needs. And the other byproduct of doing that well, Sean, in my opinion, is that, going back to what we first started the conversation with, is we're trying to develop these players for Wycombe Wanderers, but we know at the moment, and potentially long going, that Wycombe Wanderers isn't going to be their destination. So how have those players got the skill sets, the versatility, the game understanding, the problem solving skills to be able to then go beyond potentially Wycombe and onto a different market, right? So that's important. We're not just developing players for Wycombe Wanderers. That's our first stop, but there's stops beyond that.
I'm just going to interrupt the podcast for 30 seconds to tell you about We Make Footballers. We Make Footballers are the largest football coaching provider to children aged 4 to 12 in the UK, operating across 200 facilities. We focus on developing the individual, working on the technical and physical components of the game, and it's had amazing results, with hundreds of our ex-players joining professional academies and 4 of our ex-players currently playing in the Premier League. Our program is built around small-sided play using indoor and outdoor facilities. Visit our website, WeMakeFootballers.com, to see if we have a training facility in your area. There's a question I asked earlier, and I want to ask it again, but I think in a different way. So it was about the players that are being produced for Wycombe first team, but those players, how they're then suitable to sell on. So the friction that will happen between trying to be an academy that is profit making and sustainable, but producing players that can play in League One. So if we assume that Wycombe don't go up, Rico Lewis is being described as a system player. Phil Foden sometimes is described as that, like players who can only play for Man City with that Guardiola structure. But some people believe, I don't think this, but some people think that Rico Lewis wouldn't be able to drop down and play in League One and be effective. This is what they're saying, because it's so controlled playing for City. So is that something to consider? Is that something to think about in your Academy of Wycombe, in how you're going to produce players that will be of high value, that can go and play in Premier League, but then and be sold for a lot, but then also still producing players for Wycombe? Are there 2 different coaching types? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, I guess you're talking about potentially like a friction there of our current needs to where we want to be in the future. I think we are going to be on a journey here, right? So it's going to evolve, it's going to change. We're going to, potentially be saying slightly different things in a year's time or 2 years' time or 5 years' time. I think for the short term, we know what our context is and what we're trying to do. And that's very much, fundamental stuff. It's the foundations of the academy. I don't think we're going to be in a position from year 1 or year 2 to be really, really selective around that sort of stuff. We're going to have to build into that in terms of the type of player, the way that we're working with them. I think that's going to evolve and build and perhaps take a little bit of time to embed. We know the context of League One and the needs of the first team. So the current model is working brilliantly. So Sam Grace is running that at the moment with 8 development players. I've not, and Dan hasn't come in to the club and said, Sam, sorry, can you stop what you're doing now? We need to start thinking about this, because he's doing a great job. There's already around 15% of minutes coming from players that have come from non-league. And those players are ready for League One and Wycombe's needs right now, because they've had that, they've played 50 games at step 1, step 2 or step 3. So that's something, that's serving the club really, really well at the moment. Let's do that, but let's see if we can do it even better. So it tapers, right? So that's where we are now, and we know that, in 2 or 3 years' time, hopefully we'll be starting talking about the championship potentially. So yeah, I think the key to this is knowing what our context is now. Hopefully in 2 or 3 years' time, we're starting to talk about the championship. We'll hopefully have a lot of data and evidence to understand what is needed and required by that time at the championship, and we'll be able to tweak and evolve our program in the academy. I think the best development environments, they do evolve. They're not fixed. They have some core, and I said this earlier to you, they have core principles and values and behaviours that don't change, but they will adapt, they will evolve. And, I'm building at the moment an academy performance plan, which is a blueprint essentially of how we run the academy. And it's so important to say to people, like, it's a live document, and it has to be a live document. People have to add to it, contribute to it, and it changes as the needs of the organisation happen. But at the same time, the point of the APP really is to be doing that, because that's what academies are, right? We're trying to help the first team and serve the first team as best we possibly can now. But my job really is to look beyond that and start thinking about the medium and the long term of the club and where that's going to be. And as evidence-based as we can be to know what that looks like, the better. And we can start adapting our development program to those needs.
Just thinking about the benefits that could happen to the area as a result of creating this big academy, this exciting future that you're talking about, what positive changes is this academy going to bring to the local community?
I'll start, and then I think first and foremost, obviously we've moved to Harlington, but we don't neglect the fact that Wycombe's, up the road, and we have to make sure that the community and everyone involved in that understands that this is for that community, but also for London and for Reading and this surrounding area. So we're not going to neglect that. I think I mentioned it in an earlier, when I first joined the club, what brought us to the football club, the community, and knowing that potentially down the line a young player from Wycombe or a young person from the local population could walk around the streets and be proud to be a Wycombe player. And, again, go back to the history of this football club, go back to the players that have come through this club. Like, it's always been there. So we're not here to, design and think completely different. Yes, we want to go in a new direction, but we also want to sustain and keep that ethos right with us. So, yes, locally around here in Harlington and, in London, in particular, West London, we want to be a force. I want us to be a club that everyone speaks about. I look at clubs in other countries, but also in the UK, that are the small fishes, and I like that. That hopefully is the appetite that we should all have as staff coming in here every day, knowing that we are different, we can be different, and we can be successful. And I think hopefully Wycombe fans, future and present, look at us and go, actually, that's a great place to be for my son, for my, for us to go and work for. I think that brings value to also what Jeremy's talked about around high performance staff coming here. You will get an opportunity, you will get access, you will get autonomy, you'll get all the things that you may not be getting where you are right now. And I think that from an ownership point of view, that's extremely exciting for us, and where this club could really get to.
It sounds like so exciting. I really hope in the future, let's say, 5 years time, we rewatch this interview and we think, what the mentality was like at this time in just such an exciting stage. you used the phrase earlier, you were talking about in the sandpit, you know, he's literally building this all from scratch. And although maybe some stuff might be daunting, I imagine that you guys have got giant jobs lists, and you know your phone's always ringing, and you know work starts as soon as you wake up and goes right into the evening, and your wives are probably a bit annoyed, but it sounds so fun and so exciting. And you know you're building a legacy, and you touched earlier on it where you said that opening up 120 new spaces eventually into the academy, yeah, and then the job creation, like it's awesome. I think, you know, from me working at Chelsea and being a competitive Chelsea scout, you know, you look and think, oh my God, are we going to be losing players? But competition keeps people honest. It's great that there's another academy, and we had Richard Allen, the previous FA head of recruitment, and he was talking on one of our podcasts explaining how Croatia are such a force, even with such a small population, because they have so much football community, and there's a lot of overlap that happens, more players, more coaches. In America, it's one of the reasons that people say that sometimes that it's hard for player to develop because they're so isolated. So I think it's so positive that what you're doing, what you're taking on. I know what you've described with the owner and the resources that are there. So it's not maybe where some academies in the past have tried to do things and there's been a bit of maybe like hype and grand ambition, but it hasn't necessarily materialized. Thinking a little bit about to my experience at QPR, but this seems like the real deal. So yeah, congratulations. And yeah, really excited. You know, maybe we can do a follow-up next year and just see how you guys are progressing. We conclude each episode where we ask the guests to talk about a proudest moment in football that they can remember. So putting you a bit on the spot, Dan, I'm going to go to you first.
I've got one. I'll save you. I'm sure there's many. I think the one that springs to my mind straight away is the project at Wimbledon was special. It was community. It's exactly what you said there, and so many people were attached to it. And we got into the FA Youth Cup 5th round, and we drew Chelsea. Probably 20 is Tammy Abraham, Mason Mount within the team, and all the rest of it. And my proudest moment in football was two things on that day. Was walking into the stadium and it was a full house at Kingsmeadow, 4,000 people, which just blew me away. Just the attachment to the academy and being a club, and I think that this club will be the same. And the second part of it was walking in at half time into the little boardrooms and seeing some Chelsea people that I knew and were higher up in their club, a bit sweaty because it was 1-1 at half time, and knowing that we were able to go toe to toe, and we'd done that completely on culture, and we'd done that completely without the resource. And I suppose that's a bit of a proof in concept really there about the sort of pound to pound academy. Of course we weren't producing the players that they've produced, but in that one moment the collective efforts of everybody to get to that point really rang true to me.
Yeah, I got to compete with that one now. I think for me personally, I think it was probably go back to time at Fulham. So I was fortunate enough to take on the reins from famous John O'Brien, who hold dear to my heart, and a lot of people that are involved in football know John and what he did for the football club. But I was fortunate enough to take on his legacy of recruitment in at Fulham. And we had some great times, and you look at the department that we built. We were able to punch above our weight and go after players that, with all due respect, we probably weren't at the position to get to. Moussa Dembélé from PSG, Cauley Woodrow from Luton, Pat Roberts, Harvey Elliott's, Fabio Carvalho's. We had a huge amount of talent that came through our doors, and it wasn't just me. It was collective efforts of all, key people that are still at the club and now in great jobs across football. And I think that time and that era of all of us mucking in and, from one point picking up players in travel to sorting kit out for trialists to sorting out paperwork, it wasn't, we weren't fortunate enough to have huge infrastructures of staff. So we all had to muck in, and actually I learned a lot from the likes of, Hugh Jennings and Malcolm Elias and John O'Brien's of this world, that frankly, this was your life, and you went into it, and that's what we had to achieve. And we were fortunate to get a team that went all the way through to the FA Youth Cup final, and we thought we had it won in leg 1 against Chelsea, and then the proper Chelsea team turned up, the Dom Solankis of this world, in the final in the second leg, and there's a dubious offside, but we won't go into that today. I just think off the back of that, there was a huge privilege for all of us that were a part of that, because players have gone on, and right now you still see the imprint of that across the professional game.
Well, no, it's a great history that you both have had in football, and I'm sure all the Wycombe fans who are listening to this or watching this, they'll feel like, they're very grateful that you guys are at the helm and what you're building. So yeah, best of luck, and we'll be keeping in contact with your progress, and really good what you guys are doing.
I appreciate it, Sean. Thanks for coming. Cheers.